Hello students, in the previous lecture we discussed why foreign policy is categorized under the high politics as it deals directly with national security, sovereignty and the state's relations with other sovereign entities on the global stage, distinguishing it from the low politics in areas like domestic policies which focus more on economic, social and administrative matters within the national borders. We also discussed how recent developments such as globalization and interdependence, emergence of non-state actors, technological advancements, shift in global power dynamics and new and evolving security threats have challenged the conventional notion of foreign policy as a discrete and separate activity. But despite all these developments, we also discussed why it is important to the study of foreign policy of nation states. Besides, there are several theoretical frameworks that underpin the study of foreign policy in international relations. Prominent theories such as realism, liberalism, Marxism and constructivism explain how each perspective offers different insights into why states behave the way they do in international arena, especially analyzing the motivations behind the states' foreign policy decisions, their interactions with other states and their response to global challenges. In this class, we will discuss the determinants of foreign policy or the factors that influence and shape a state's decisions and actions in international relations, as understanding them is essential for analyzing how states navigate the complexities of global affairs and pursue their interest and objective in the international arena. This would be the outline of our lecture. First, we will discuss about the determinants, which are of two types. First, we will discuss about the internal determinants, then we will discuss the external determinants. Then we will end our discussion with some concluding remarks. Now let us discuss about the determinants of foreign policy. Particularly, there are two types of determinants. One is called the internal determinants, the other is called the external determinants. It comes the rule of geography. The topography of land, its fertility, climate and location are the major geographical factors which influence the foreign policy of a particular nation. These factors determine both the needs as well as the capability to fulfill the needs of the people of a nation. So, geography is a very important factor because so you have to take into account your geography, the size of your geography, the location of your geography, the climate, the land, the fertility. So, everything these are all important factors while you are thinking of foreign policy, because after all you formulate policy for the safety and security of your geography, for your sovereignty. The location of a country accounts for its behavior towards other members of that location, particularly because India is located in a region that is always troubled by violence, there is always problem of democracy. So, whenever you think of any neighborhood policy, you have to think about these factors, how the neighborhood is affected by violence, non-state actors are prominent in the region, there is less democracy in most of the countries. So these factors are very important when you think of a foreign policy, you think of a policy for your immediate neighborhood. So, for India, neighborhood is the first point where you start, because you are living in the region. So, the problems associated with the region, the calamities associated with the region, the kind of conflicts there in the region, these factors you take into account first and foremost. So that is why the geographical location is very important for you. The neighboring countries are your closest neighbors and they can also be best friends or host enemies. Take for the example of Pakistan and Bhutan. With Pakistan you do not have good relationship, you do not have normal diplomatic relationship, and with Bhutan you have very close relationship. So these two countries are India's neighbors, but the issue is there are certain points which you have to take into account while formulating your neighborhood policy. Who is your friend, who is not your friend, how you can deal with those countries who are difficult for you to deal with. These considerations are important part of your geography. Beside proximity, there is also the possibility of strategic location. The natural frontiers of an island such as Britain, for instance, provide both a natural security and a natural aptitude for mastery of the seas. The issue is, if you are located in, as an island nation, if you are a landlocked country, if you are, surrounded by the Himalayas, then, these kind of things, play an important role while you are formulating your policy. The availability of natural resources or none is also a factor of geography. So, nations with abundant resources of international commercial value are likely going to be important in world politics and ultimately become ambitious. So, if you are endowed with uranium, if you are endowed with lithium, if you are endowed with rare earth materials, if you are endowed with petroleum or natural gas, so these factors will make you definitely powerful, because these are the resources that is needed by everyone, for everyone. So the point is, countries like UAE, countries like Kuwait, they have become internationally prominent because of their because of their natural resources, because they are gifted with rare kind of resources which others are competing for, or others are trying to get it from those countries. Then the issue of demography, that is also again important for foreign policy making. And when we are talking of demography, we are talking of the population of a particular country. Population has both commercial or market and political value. The largest populations are good market for international capitalist investment, which also translates to political influence. So, if you are endowed with large number of population, and if population is skilled, they are educated, they are young, these factors definitely matters a lot in international politics. And if you have a large number of middle class population, they are considered as very good for economic development, for market purposes. If today India and America, they are having good relationship, one reason is the fact that there is a significant growth of middle class population in the last few decades, and America and other countries, including the countries in West Asia, they need India as a market for their capital, for technology, for their products to be sold in India. So the issue is, these issues are also taken into consideration while the countries are thinking of foreign policy. So this may be one of the reasons that can explain the closer relationship between India and America, or maybe the West Asian nations and India in recent years. The 10 largest populations of the world, including India, China, USA, Indonesia, are all commercially and politically significant in the world. So, if you think of the 10 most populated countries of the world, including India, China, USA or Indonesia, or maybe other countries, they are all commercially and politically significant because they have good number of population, which is good for both political reasons and for economic reasons. The military value of demography is that the sheer population size of states could be either intimidating or to smaller ones, or become more important for military refill in times of war and crisis. So, if you have enough number of population, they are skilled, they are laborious, they are disciplined, that becomes an asset for the countries while formulating their policy. You will recall one statement made by Chairman Mao in the context of American threat to use nuclear weapons against China. So, Mao remarked that if they kill 300 million of us, then we would still have many people left. So, that underscores the significance of population or demographic in a country's foreign policy. So, if you have enough number of population, so definitely you will formulate your policies taking into consideration that kind of demographic factor. If you are young, if you have a number, suppose India has now about 35 million diaspora living in other countries. So, that is definitely a factor when India has to formulate any kind of policy towards the other countries. When there was a war between Russia and Ukraine, so India was worried because it had some 23,000 students who were pursuing medical education in Ukraine. So, you are not worried about condemning Russia, you are not worried about what is happening with Ukraine. So you are not worried about that. You are only worried that how you can evacuate, how you can rescue your 23,000 students who are entangled in that conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So the point is, if you have population, that is definitely a major reason for formulating your foreign policy. Then political system, which is crucial in the shaping of the foreign policy of a particular country. Generally, democracies are more likely to be more stable and find one another attractive for any kind of alliances. You will recall that during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's prime ministership, he called that the Americans and the Indians, they are the natural friends, right? Or they are the basically close friends, and it is natural for two democratic countries to be close to each other. So that was the statement made by Vajpayee. So the point is, political system is crucial. Whether you are a democratic country, you are a non-democratic country, these things are all important for foreign policy of a country. You will recall that when Mr. Vajpayee was the prime minister, he famously remarked that the Americans and the Indians, they are the natural friends, because both are democratic countries, both are multicultural countries. So definitely there is no chance that they would not be friends, because it is the nature of their political system, it is the nature of their society that will make each other as good friends. So the point is, these are the factors, these are the issues that is looked after when you think of your foreign policy. Then the military capability is also important as a factor for your foreign policy. It refers to the war resources at the disposal of states. What kind of resources you have in case you want to fight a war, in case you want to make a peace. So for all these decisions, you have to look at your military capability. A skillful, disciplined and well-armed military will not only firmly secure the territorial integrity of a particular country, but also have the capacity to provide both regional and international security. So if you have a good military, if you have good military capability, then it's not only that you will ensure your territorial integrity, rather sometimes if there is a need, you can provide others the necessary help. Just remember the tsunami in the late 2003-2004, when India and its Navy particularly, it supplied humanitarian assistance to many of the countries like Sri Lanka, like Thailand, like Indonesia. So many countries were helped by India, because India has a predominant navy in the Indian Ocean. So that acted as the first responder before anybody else could come and help them. So India provided the necessary help. So if you have good military capability, that is also beneficial for your foreign policy, because you could help others, you could come to the rescue, you could be the first responder. The level of economic development also determines the scope of relations a nation wishes to establish with other countries. So if you are economically powerful, so that decides what kind of relationship you want to pursue with other countries. If you are economically dependent like Pakistan, like North Korea, so you don't have much foreign policy choices, much foreign policy options. So this is very important to understand, that you should be both economically and militarily powerful, not just economically, not just militarily, because these are the two legs of a person. So with one leg you can't run, you can't compete. The foreign policy of Japan in the contemporary period is directly and fundamentally related to its economic development. There are many occasions when Japan got more influence than India in international politics. Especially I am talking of a situation when both India and Japan were competing for a non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council, but India was not successful because it was not economically superior to Japan, which used its what is called checkbook diplomacy to influence other countries voting. So the point is, if you are economically powerful, definitely, others will listen you, others, because you can help others, you can influence their foreign policy behavior. So that is the point. So you need economic development, or you need better economic condition, so that your foreign policy and policies of others can be influenced. The military preparedness and military capability of a nation is again directly related to the factor of economic development and industrialization. If you are economically developed, if you are highly industrialized, definitely that would have an impact on your military capability. Only industrially and economically developed nations can hope to become major and stable military powers. As I said, in the context of Pakistan, in the context of North Korea, if you want to play an important role in international politics, so you should be economically advanced, economically self-sufficient, so that you don't depend on other countries like China or Saudi Arabia in case of Pakistan, because if you are economically dependent on them, then it is up to them to dictate your policy, and if you think of a policy which is not considered appropriate by them, they will simply pressurize you to change your policy. So the point is, you need better economic conditions, better economic development for playing an important role in international politics. The cultural heritage and the history of a nation are again important and valuable factors of its foreign policy. So like economic development, cultural heritage of a nation, the history of a nation, the kind of freedom struggle suppose we had in case of India, they are all important factors that influence a country's foreign policy. During the process of interpreting and formulating the foreign policy objectives, the decision makers are always governed by their cultural links, historical traditions and experiences. So if you look at India's Act East policy, or India's West Asia policy, neighborhood first policy, they are all important, because they have in a way linked to India's cultural connection, historical tradition and experiences. They are facing the same kind of issues, they are facing the same kind of economic problems. India has same kind of cultural relations with them. Culturally all the regions are very close to each other, in the sense that India has influenced their culture, they also influence India's culture. So these are the factors that is taken into consideration while formulating the foreign policy of a country. Bitter experience with the policies of imperialism and colonialism have been a major deciding factor of the anti-imperialistic and anti-colonial contents of the foreign policy of most of the new countries. Then the organization and structure of the government, that is the organizational agencies which handle the foreign policy making and implementation, is also another important factor for the foreign policy of a particular country. For instance, in the Indian system, you will find that nowadays the Prime Minister's office, it has become more important than the Ministry of External Affairs. So the point is, this is specifically something very context specific. This is something which happened for last several decades, because most of the prime ministers in India, they were having a small number of people, those who were trusted by the prime minister. So they started with the prime minister's secretariat, and in a way it became so powerful that it undermined the role of all other ministries, all other important actors. So the point is, the kind of organization and structure of the government, that again is an important factor, whether it is the Minister of External which formulate the Indian foreign policy, or the PMO, that is again another important factor in the formulation of a country's foreign policy. The nature of legislative executive relations is also an influential factor in the foreign policy decision making. So either you are a parliamentary system, you are a presidential system. If you are in a parliamentary system, that is no rigid separation of power between the executive and the legislature, so you get good support, you get timely support from the legislature, because you have majority in the legislature. So the issue is, it all depends whether you get coordination, you get cooperation, you get support from the opposition, and it all depends how you get support from the parliament, whether parliament is creating a problem for you, or it's supporting your policy decisions. So they are all important for the foreign policy of a particular country. Similar, the nature of party system, elections and the electorate are also important factors. Since the foreign policy of a nation is made and implemented by leaders, statesmen and diplomats, naturally it bears an imprint on their values, talents, experiences and personalities. So, these are all important factors, what kind of leaders you have, what kind of, whether they are just simple political leaders who are thinking about themselves, their party, their family, or they are thinking about the nation. So, that is also important for a country's foreign policy. And also the quality of diplomats, whether you have good quality diplomats, whether you have enough diplomats, these are all important issues. The ideas, orientations, likings, dislikings, attitude, knowledge, skill and the worldview of the national decision makers are influential inputs of foreign policy decision making. So, the point is what they like, what they do not like, their attitude, their behavior, their knowledge, their skill, this is all fine. These are all important reasons, these are all important factors. The modes of operation and the quality of diplomacy always affect the operational quality and efficiency of a particular country's foreign policy. Morgenthau regards diplomacy as the best instrument of power management among the states. So, the quality of diplomacy is ultimately important because they are the people who think about the issues, who initiate the issues, who get necessary support from other stakeholders, and ultimately they are the people who implement the policy. So, it is the quality of the diplomats, it is the quality of the political leaders that ultimately influence your foreign policy. I can just give you one example. During Prime Minister Modi and External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar's time, you find their diplomatic style something different from other foreign ministers, other prime ministers, and in many occasions this diplomatic style has helped India to achieve its foreign policy objective. As I had already given the example of how successfully India navigated itself from the problem of Russia-Ukraine war, whether it is in terms of our energy security, in terms of evacuating our Indian students from Ukraine, or in taking a strong position against the American sanctions, or maybe so the way we dealt with this issue, that shows the diplomatic style, the quality of diplomacy and the thinking of your political leaders and diplomats. Now, let us discuss about the external determinants. Critical among the external variables or determinants are global strategic environment, opinions and actions of great powers, international and regional issues and crises, alliances and groupings, membership of regional and international organizations, international law, etc. So, these are the factors, these are the external factors that influence your foreign policy decision. The foreign policy of every nation is influenced by the nature of power structure that prevails at a particular period of time. You might have seen that India's policy of non-alignment was a kind of reaction to the Cold War between the two superpowers. So the kind of power structure, the nature of power structure at a particular period of time, that influences its country's foreign policy, as you can see in case of India's policy of non-alignment. Similarly, when the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, India was forced to reconsider its foreign policy options, reevaluate its foreign policy options, and it developed a close relationship with the United States. Opinions and actions of great powers both within and outside the United Nations, that also matters a lot to countries like India. China's position on the UN Security Council reform and the policy on terrorism certainly guides India's policy towards that country. So, there are 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Except China, all other countries support India's membership in the reformed UN Security Council. So, how China opposes and how that affects India's policy, and particularly its policy on terrorism, its double standard on terrorism, these are all issues India thinks it important while formulating any policy on these issues. Similarly, international and regional issues and crises are also important factors of the foreign policy of a particular country. The issue of new international economic order, energy crisis, the problem of distribution of international resources, the issue of proliferation, protection of human rights, elimination of international terrorism, regional crisis as we have seen in case of Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan and others. These are all important factors that a nation has to consider while formulating the foreign policy. So these are all important factors you can't ignore, because the countries living in your neighborhood, if they are confronted with any kind of problem, that always has a bearing on you, so you can't close your eyes. Then the alliances and groupings, that is again important for the foreign policy of a particular country. The extensive and intensive system of alliances that emerged in the post 1945 period had a big impact on the foreign policies of all nations. There was NATO, there was Warsaw Pact. So the newly developed countries, they were furious about these military alliances, because they thought that because of their poor and bad historical experience with colonialism, they were not interested for any kind of alignment with these military blocs. You can also find India's policy towards Quad, BRIC, India, Israel, USA and UAE, this I2U2, the International Solar Alliance. These are all groupings that influence India's foreign policy, that has a major impact on India's foreign policy. Similarly, the membership of international organizations and regimes, they particularly the treaties, charters, covenants, agreements and so forth, that bind the member countries and guide their foreign policy actions. India has refused to send its troops to Iraq. When America invaded Iraq, it requested India to send military troops to fight with the coalition forces, but India refused, because the coalition forces were operating without the support, without the umbrella of the United Nations. So that was the reason. India is a party to more than 160 treaties and conventions dealing with various issues like air law, space law, maritime law, cyber security, so many issues. So these, when you become a party to all these laws, all these conventions, that, and if you are a member of any particular international organization or regional organization, that also influence your foreign policy decisions. Similarly, international law also affect the behavior of the states, because as long as you are the signing partner, so you have to follow them, you have to obey them. Foreign policies are often formulated and implemented with such frameworks. So if you are formulating any policy, if that policy is going to violate the international law, you have to take into account that also. India, for example, follows the principle of dualism, that is, international law doesn't automatically get incorporated into the domestic legal regime, but it requires the parliament to give its necessary approval for international law to become the municipal law or the domestic law. So the point is, these are the factors, international law, international organization, the global distribution of power, the opinion of the great powers, the activities of great powers, international crisis, they are all important for understanding a country's foreign policy behavior, or these are the important factors the states take into consideration while formulating a particular kind of foreign policy. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We discussed that foreign policy decisions are influenced by a complex interplay of internal and external determinants. Under the internal determinants, we discussed the role of geography, population, political system, military capability, level of economic development, historical experience, cultural heritage, organization and structure of the government, quality of political leadership, diplomacy and public opinion, and media in shaping a country's foreign policy. Under the external determinants, we discussed the role of global power dynamics, opinions and actions of great powers, international and regional issues and crises, alliances and groupings, membership of regional and international organizations, and even international law. Understanding these internal and external determinants helps the analyst and policymakers to comprehend the motivations behind a state's foreign policy decisions and predict its actions in the international arena. Moreover, effective foreign policy formulation requires balancing these diverse forces while pursuing national interest and contributing to the global stability and cooperation. In the next lecture, we will discuss the actors and institutions involved in the making of a country's foreign policy, especially from the experience of India. Thank you very much. We will see and discuss the remaining issues of foreign policy in the next lecture. Thank you once again.